Let's start with a really simple but heavy question. What's a human life worth? Well, for one of America's most powerful companies back at the turn of the 20th century, the answer was chillingly simple. And today, we're going to dig into the story of the men who decided to fight back against that number.
$30. That's it. In 1907, in Breckenridge, Montana, that was the Anaconda Company's official price tag for a dead miner. It was just a single month's wages. For the company, it was probably just a line item on a balance sheet, a clerical thing. But for the men who were down there, deep underground, it was this constant, cold reminder of exactly how much they were worth.
So our story really kicks off in a world that was literally made of copper. Breckenridge, Montana, well, it wasn't just a town, it was a company town. And that meant one company owned everything. The jobs, the houses, the general store, even the law. The whole place was a machine, and it was designed for just one purpose: getting copper out of the ground.
Life there was a completely closed system. It was engineered to squeeze every last drop of value out of its workers. Men like our protagonist, a guy named Martin Voss. He was a 28-year-old German immigrant. Now, he knew he was caught on a system that was designed to grind him down. He hadn't figured out a way to fight it yet.
$4.2 million. I mean, think about that number for a second. That was the Anaconda Company's reported profit in a single year. An absolutely immense amount of wealth, and all of it was pulled from the earth by men working in some pretty horrific conditions.
And what was the reality for the guys actually producing all that wealth? Well, take a look. Their wages barely covered survival. After you paid for your room and board, which went right back to the company, by the way, and bought your tools from the company store, a miner might save $10 in a good month. But a lot of the time, it was nothing. It was basically a cycle of debt designed to trap them right there. Any dream of getting out was, well, it was just that, a dream.
But here's the thing about a system built on that kind of imbalance: it's fragile. It just takes a single spark to light a fire. And for Martin Voss, that spark came from a horrible tragedy deep underground and the company's cold, calculated reaction to it.
A cave-in. 12 men were killed. Martin, he survived, but he was trapped for 18 hours in total darkness, listening to one man die slowly and another one just lose his mind. And what was the company's response? 3 days later, the survivors were cleared to go right back to work. For Martin, that was the absolute breaking point. So after this sham of an inquest that, surprise, surprise, cleared the company of any wrongdoing, Martin went looking for the one group that was willing to fight back: the industrial workers of the world, or the Wobblies as they were known. He found a Finnish organizer, a guy named Makale, and with just 5 simple words, he let him know he was ready. Now, the IWW had a pretty radical vision for the time. They believed it didn't matter if you were Finnish or Irish or German, if you are a skilled driller or an unskilled mucker. They said all workers shared the exact same struggle, and the only possible way to win was to act together as one big union. So under Makale's guidance, Martin started learning the really patient and frankly dangerous work of building a union from scratch. First, you have to build trust, one quiet conversation at a time. Then you educate people, sharing pamphlets, explaining why collective action is necessary. You recruit quietly, putting together a secret committee away from any company spies. And only then can you act as one. It all happened in whispers, deep in the mines, far away from the foreman's eye. And so after months and months of all this secret organizing, those whispers were about to become a roar. The miners had built their solidarity underground, and now they were ready. They were ready to bring this fight to the surface and say, all right, this far and no further. But that brought them to the central question, didn't it? How do you fight an enemy that owns your home, your food, your job, pretty much everything? So with nearly 400 workers organized, the miners went and presented their demands: better wages, and crucially, safety committees run by the workers themselves. The company's superintendent's response was, well, it was simple and very direct. On April 14th, the strike began. The mine fell silent for the first time in 15 years. The company's retaliation was incredibly swift and brutal, and it wasn't just aimed at the workers, it was aimed at their families. The company immediately opened up its classic playbook for crushing strikes, tactics that might sound pretty familiar even today. They started with mass evictions from the company houses. They cut off all credit at the company store. They used every single point of control they had to turn the screws, not just on the miners, but on their wives and their children.
So you see, this wasn't really a fight on a picket line anymore. This was a war of attrition. It was a siege. The striking families were forced into this makeshift tent city, and it just became a fight for survival in a cold, muddy camp as kids got sick and food started to run out. The company's goal was simple. They were going to starve them into submission.
Well, no amount of courage can overcome starvation. After 3 brutal weeks, with all their resources gone and solidarity starting to fracture under the immense pressure of watching their families suffer, the strike just collapsed.
The defeat was absolute. It was total. The miners got nothing. Martin and the other organizers, they could only go back to work after signing these humiliating statements denouncing the union. See, the company didn't just want to win, they wanted to punish them. They wanted to make an example out of them for ever daring to resist in the first place.
But was it really a failure? I mean, Superintendent Carmichael, he definitely saw it as a victory, a punishment designed to make the men live with their failure. But the wider labor movement, represented here by the IWW leader Big Bill Haywood, they saw it very differently. They saw it as a lesson, a really painful but necessary education for the next fight.
So yeah, the strike was lost, but was the experience just erased? Not at all. It became part of a much larger story. Guys like Martin and the hundreds of others who were eventually blacklisted and forced to leave Breckenridge, they carried the lessons of that strike, both the solidarity and the defeat, with them. They took those seeds to other mines, to other factories, ready for the next fight.
And that brings us all the way back to our final question. The workers of Breckenridge lost everything. They lost their homes, their savings, their strike. The company won. But in this long, grinding fight for just basic human dignity, is a losing fight still worth fighting? What's the value of standing up, even when you know you are probably going to fall?